Hello and welcome. In this tutorial, we are going to start by looking at a couple other, I would say, global lighting options. And by global, I mean looking like you're outside in the world kind of lighting. And then we're going to go from there and we're going to look at how we can create volumetric fog in Cinema 4D using Redshift. And we're going to look at two methods for that. So we'll be split up into a couple chunks within this one larger tutorial, but we will also be looking at how to do that in like a global scale, so it's kind of foggy all over the place, and then also how to localize that fog. Like you can imagine like fog in a valley or something like that, or coming up out of like a sewer or something, and how to make fog that's much more focused in a certain particular place. Okay, so to get started, we're going to create a landscape because we're going to be starting with this landscape outdoor thing. And so, in order to keep our modeling to a minimum, we're going to create a landscape. And we're going to go ahead and let's set the size on this landscape to 1,000 by 1,000 by 1,000. And then we can go ahead and pull our camera back a little bit. And you'll see we have something of a mountain here. It's pretty exciting. So what we're going to do is we're going to increase our width and depth segments as well. We're going to go 200 and 200. And I want you to note that refines these edges a bit. It gives us just a little bit more. If you haven't used the landscape previously, there's several settings here where you can adjust kind of the look and feel. If we increase the furrows or decrease the furrows, right, you get these, there's a lot of change that can happen there. And if we increase the fine furrows or decrease the fine furrows, right, we can either get a smoother or a more crisp looking landscape. And then scale is another option where we can, right, basically amplify the amount of noisiness on this landscape and get, something that's totally ridiculous. I'm going to leave mine set here. My cat is stuck in the door, so I'm going to go help her out. Cat has been saved. Although, there's only so much you can do. If it's the kind of cat that gets stuck in the door, it's probably going to get stuck in the door again. Okay. So we've got some landscape. I might actually dial the scale back down to 1-ish, because what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to show you also how to make a simple material that will like really cheaply apply like green, brown, and then white to this landscape, so it looks like a mountain range sort of that's been done really, really poorly, but it's quick. So, also, you can change the orientation of this. You can make it a pit. You can aim this whichever direction, like many other primitives. And so, but we don't need to worry about any of that. The other thing that's kind of cool is check marking this spherical. If I zoom out some more now, you'll see it actually just makes this like crazy noisy blob. Sea level and plateau level. If we pull plateau level down, you'll note that we are going to get like an actual like plateau, right? Like a flat surface that that everything else descends from. If we raise our sea level, right, basically what that does is it's going to pull this in and it gives us like, sea level. Obviously, in our case, this would be insanely exaggerated. And that's just because this is, right, 1,000 here. But we're going to put our sea level back to 0. We're going to uncheck spherical. I'm going to hit S, so I'm actually zoomed in correctly. And then the seed value, this just basically changes like what seed value is used to generate the noise that creates this landscape looking thing. I'm actually really stoked with my seed value of 6 because this is a really nice spire coming up here with some nice edges. If I'm unhappy with the resolution of this, right, if it's like, because you'll note there's like some pretty jagged points on here that don't necessarily look jagged in like a good way. They look a little bit odd. One thing you can do is you can always put this in a subdivision surface. And that will round out and smooth things a bit. And it depends on your purpose. It depends on what you're looking to do. In our case, this will work pretty great. If you have something that looks like this, fantastic. If not, you can probably find, something else. We can always switch our seed at any point that we need to. So let's go ahead and create a material for this landscape real quick, and then we'll get on to the lighting. So to create our material for this, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure we are using the Redshift render engine. So you have to click on render settings up here where the gear is on this little box, and make sure the renderer at the top is set to Redshift. Once we know that's okay, we can click on our material manager, little circle, smiling cyclops, whatever that is. And we're going to create a new default material by just hitting the plus sign. Then we're going to double click because we're going to do some stuff with nodes. And really just one node. So let's go ahead and double click. We've got our node editor up, and we want to change the color of this material. So we're going to connect a node to this, and what we want to do is we want to create a gradient, right? We want to basically have, at this lower elevation, we would like green. Maybe somewhere higher up, we want some brown or tan, and then we want like a snow-capped peak. And so we're going to go ahead and double click. Now, gradients in Redshift are not called gradients, they are called ramps. So if I type in ramp, you can imagine a ramp is like, it's a ramp, right? It goes from like ground to high in the air, where you then fly off on your bicycle or whatever you're doing, right? Or your car, and go sailing through the air. Right, it's a ramp. It changes values gradually. It's not a step. So we're going to go ahead and double click on the ramp, and we'll go ahead and connect this to our color channel. And not a whole lot is going to change right away. It doesn't look like anything has happened whatsoever. And that's because it's not really going to show up very well in our viewport. So I'm going to close the material manager. We don't need that open right now. And I'm going to click on my Redshifty. If you've been following along in the tutorials, we've created our own layout that has the Redshift render view built in. This is what we're going to be working towards at some point. If that's not available, you can always go to Redshift, the Redshift menu at the top of the screen, and go to Redshift to RS render view. You can also go to window, and I believe RS render view is under there, maybe not. But you can, the other option is in your viewport, you can always click here and you go to RS render view. It'll pop up as a pop-up window, and then you can click on this little thing and lock it in wherever you need to. Okay, so we've got this set. Let's go ahead and hit play on this so we can actually see. And you'll notice, right, nothing too exciting is happening on this landscape. It looks really plain and boring right now. Now, part of that is probably because, though I've created this material, I may very well not have applied it to my landscape. Because when you're doing tutorials, sometimes you forget to do simple things like that. So I'm going to drag this over and put it on the landscape. I'm going to try to keep it off the subdivision surface for now. Okay. So now you can see something's definitely changed, right? This is much glossier. And if I rotate this around a little bit, we should be able to see an area where it's darker. You can kind of see where that's dark gray there. It's not because of a lighting issue, right? The only light in the scene right now is coming straight from the camera. And so this gradient is currently not, or this ramp is not in the orientation we want. So if I double click and bring up my node editor again, if it's closed, and I select this, you'll see here's my ramp. It's going from black to white. And you'll note that my mapping is currently vertical. What I want to do is I want to switch this to circular. Radial, if I click on that, it might show up. Yeah, right. You get this, like, it's almost like a time clock, or right, some sort of fade over as it rotates around. And that's not what we want. We want circular, where it's basically like a black dot in the center and white on the edges. And if I do that, you'll see now the tip of this mountain is black, and then it fades into white as it goes down. Well, we definitely don't want that to be the order. We want white to be at the top. So we're just going to go ahead and click on these little sliders and slide this one over here. And maybe just leave this one about 2/3 of the way down. And you'll see now we've definitely got white on top of the mountain. Let's go ahead and make this, instead of black, we're going to make it green-ish. Somewhere in here. And we'll make it a nice forest green. We're going to hit OK. And you can see already we're starting to get like green at the bottom of the mountain and white at the top. But what we want to do is we want to add another point. So if you just hover over here, you get this like ghost knot or whatever they call it. And you click on there, double click, and let's make this like a pretty reddish tan. I want it to stand out so it's really easy to see what we're doing here. Whew, that's a little bit too yellow. Right, but you can see now I've got these like long fades, and I'm going to zoom this out just a touch so we can kind of see the whole mountain. Right, so we've got like white up top, we've got yellow in the middle, green down below, but that's a pretty gentle slide we've got going on there, and it'd be nice if that was a little bit more crisp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the white knot, I'm going to pull it down towards this yellow one, and then I'm going to move this over a little bit so you can see, right? So now there's a much more defined difference. And again, I'm telling you, this is like the cheap way to do it, right? This is not for like, if this mountain was the only thing we were doing, we probably would want to go in and hand do this, or use a smarter method with more nodes in order to figure out the height of these and have the color based on the height. Kind of like making contour lines, but we're not going to do that today because that is a process. Okay, so we are going to maybe pull some more of the green in towards the yellow. And now the yellow, right, doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'm going to go ahead and make this more of an orange and then drop it down a little bit so it's a little bit more brown, maybe a lot more brown, and hit OK. Right, and so that doesn't necessarily look great either. We'll fade this out just a little bit this way and maybe just push this just a tiny bit the other way into the snow. Right, but again, we're not really doing a great job. We're just trying to do something quick. This mountain has a huge snow field and very little going on below it. Maybe I can pull this up a little bit higher and actually push the brown up the mountainside a touch. Now you'll see, right, I'm starting to get some weirdness in there. So again, this is just something where if you were doing something in the background and there's going to be fog and other things, and you know nobody's really going to see that the logic of this isn't working, this is where you can work. So some other things to note with this, we can also add noise and we can add frequency. And so what that does, right, you can kind of see immediately what that does, right? It's going to create some pretty big noise across this surface. Now, it could be useful to add a tiny bit, like 0.01 might be nice. That like tweaks it just a little bit. We could maybe go to 0.1 and just see what that's like. Right, even that is a lot. I think we could go 0.05. All right, so we've got a little few streaks there. We're getting a little bit more. And then the noise frequency, right? If we crank this up, you can kind of see, right, that gives us like a little bit, like it's more frequent. And if we drop it down to 0 or just something small, it's going to slow that down a little bit. So this just could potentially add more to it. And I can't remember if with this, if we can rotate this easily here. It doesn't look like we can. There's some other options where we can use UV maps or other things. We can assign a certain texture space, but in our case, we're just making this, you know, kind of basic and dumb. Okay, so we've made our mountain. That's fantastic. We could make a whole range of mountains. If you haven't used the cloner yet, it's a blast, right? We could drop a cloner in here. We could make this a child of the cloner. And then we could, right, get a whole bunch of mountains that are very, very close together. Right, if we make this a grid that is, what did we make the tiles? 1,000? And maybe 1,000 this way. Is that 100? Oops, let's do 1,000 this way. Right, so now we've got like valleys and mountain ranges and things like that. So go ahead and do that. Create a cloner and just set the first value in this row, the size to 1,000 and 1,000, but we're going to leave it set to 3 copies by 3 copies. What this is going to do is when we go to make fog in the valleys, we've now got a valley. Granted, all of our mountains look identical, but but we're not too worried about that, right? We're just trying to get the technique down. Okay, so you could go in, you could have different mountains with different seed values. Yeah, but in our case, they're all the same mountain. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the node editor for a bit. And we've got our mountains. So let's go ahead and put these in something other than in an endless void. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the sun and sky rig. So I'm going to go ahead and click sun and sky rig. And when I do that, we're going to notice that we might want to adjust our materials so that these don't look like airbrushed epoxied, cast fiberglass models that you would see at like a McDonald's from the 80s or something. Instead, what we want to do is we want to, well, we're going to leave the shininess on there now so we kind of see which direction the sun's coming from. Okay, so we've got our mountains. I've just rotated the view a touch. It doesn't really matter where we're at. So long as you can see the sky, you can see, right, there's this emptiness here. And so we can talk about a few of these settings really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and close up my material editor, and I'm going to pull this over just a touch so we can actually see our settings in the sky. And I'm going to shrink that because I do not need the viewport at all. Okay, so first, right, we've got several different tags or tabs here. We have our basic, our coordinates, which we don't need to worry about, sky and sun, and then our overrides. So first there's the intensity. So it's like any light source, right? I can boost this intensity and make the whole scene brighter. I can drop the intensity down, right, and make the whole thing a little bit darker. I'm going to leave it set to 1. There's a few different models we can use. If you click on those, you'll see that it does change the way light is in the scene. I have not honestly looked at, what the specific differences are. PRG clear sky is not the best, but it's the default. Turbidity. So turbidity is going to adjust the kind of haziness in the air. It's not really adding any fog at this point. But you might notice like some changes to the sky above the high skyline there. And again, without fog and things, we might not notice that much, but you can kind of see if I really blast it out, we're going to get a lot more what looks like light scattering, right? It almost looks more smoggy, or, if you've been to Los Angeles at all, the skies often kind of look like this. There's, right, and any kind of day where it's not like absolutely clear, but you've got a haze. Iowa in midsummer also looks like that. So if you, right, so somewhere around there is probably fine for turbidity. Horizon height, if you boost this up, you will see, I boosted it way up. Let me go to like 1 real quick. Let's see if that's right. You can see I can adjust where my horizon is, which can be really helpful if I'm not going to be putting a ground plane in. I've got it set to -1, and right now that works really well for how these mountains are playing out. Horizon blur, I'm going to put this back up to 0 so you can kind of see what this does. Horizon blur, surprisingly enough, blurs the horizon, right? And I can crank that. I can really blur it, and right, if it's really blurred, it almost looks like a very calm ocean or lake, because it's very, very similar to that. And you can blur it more or less. I'm going to go ahead and pull this down just a touch more. But I may leave that blurring on, at least a little bit, right? So I've got the blurring there. The ground color, right, is currently this color here. And I can always change that to, whatever I want to. I don't think I want this to be red, but I may want it to be, you know, something closer to the green that I'm using as the base of my landscape. And so, right, I can get it reasonably close. Now, it's not going to fool anybody in the foreground, but in the background, it doesn't look so bad. It looks like it's opening out onto some plains and it's kind of just disappearing into the background. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that. We don't need to worry about night color right now, and we're not going to worry about the color shift. If I scroll down a little bit, note that the sun tab is open currently as well. And it's telling me this is the sun I'm using. If I pop this open up here in my hierarchy, you'll see that's the same, that's the object there. The sun disk intensity I can increase. I can increase the scale. I can increase the sun glow intensity. I can adjust the tint. And so I have several options and ways that I can manipulate this. You might note that by default it's either on R or H, hue, saturation, and brightness. T is the temperature setting, right? If I wanted this to be significantly warmer, right, I could set this temperature here, right? And we are going to get a very, very red sky, right? This is not necessarily physically accurate. I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And yeah, but so I can adjust the tint. Tint, generally, you don't want it to be this rich. You want it to be significantly lighter in tone, right? I'd want to pull this vibrance like way down, or, you know, like not have that much color there. The sun disk intensity right now, if I boost this up, right, we're not really seeing any differences here, but let's go ahead and rotate our view so we can actually see the sun. There we go. If I go up higher, there it is. Look at that. It's way up high. It's like noon. Okay, so if I increase the disk scale, right, you're going to see that, right, our sun gets much larger. And if I decrease that disk intensity some, it should mellow out. Let's see, I'm going to hit refresh on this, just see if that cleans that up a little bit. Now I'm going to boost it way up here and see if that makes any difference. Right, this probably is more of an intensity that we see elsewhere in the scene. The glow intensity, right, if I blast this up to 35, right, we get a lot of glow. If I drop it down to 10, that's still a lot. All right, if I go back down to like 0, we should just have a much more crisp sun. Obviously, the sun doesn't typically look quite this white. If if you're like me and you stare at the sun sometimes, right? It's it's actually more of a greenish color, but because of the way light gets filtered through the atmosphere, it looks a little bit more yellowish, right? But you have to be careful, because as soon as you start doing this, right, your entire scene is going to start to go yellow, right? And so you can do just a tiny bit maybe, but note that that is going to make a huge impact, right, on the entire scene of your sun. And so some of this stuff doesn't matter if your sun's not going to be in your shot, but if it is, then you want to make sure the disk looks right, the way you want it, and that the color's there and everything else. Okay, this is a great moment to save our work real quick. I'm just going to call this foggy, because that's what we're going to get here in a little bit. And so we've got our landscape, and this is what it looks like if we use the Redshift sun. I'm going to go ahead and rotate my view a bit so we can actually see our mountains. Now, one of the issues is that right now the sun's kind of in one place. And what I'd like to do is have the ability to like move this sun. So if I select the sun, there's a lot of things I can adjust on here. Most of this stuff is just specifically, these are the same thing that are on most other lights. If I go to the coordinates, I can rotate, and I can't remember which one it is that I want to rotate. Let's see. Well, I could rotate the sun using these tools to do the rotation. All right, if I want the sun to go down, let's see where we're at. Come here, sun, where are you at? Oh, maybe that's not the right one. Maybe I actually have to do this. There we go. Right, so you can see as the sun sets, and there we go. Oh, okay, right? So 2 degrees. Let's set this to 4 degrees. Oh, I guess I'm going the wrong direction. Let's set this to -4 degrees. Okay, so, right, so I can use this rotation to set time of day, right? And depending on my scene and what I'm attempting to do, this might, be an effective way to do this. Let's set this to 0. That should be like right. Look at that. Right on this. This is the actual horizon. And this is that horizon blurring that's going on below it, along with some of that turbidity that we've turned on. So, right, it's a little bit dark right now. It's a little actually probably past sunset or getting close to being past sunset if it's right at 0 degrees. So I'm going to set this to -2 degrees. Let the sun go up a little bit. Right, and so you can see we've got a pretty nice looking scene here. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this a little bit more just so we can see like what that. So you can kind of see, right, night is falling in the background. Right, this is the side of the mountains that are facing the sun. And you can get some really nice looking stuff. Now, something else that we can do, instead of using something raw degrees like this, depending on your use, you may want to use the sun in a different way. I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick, and then I'm going to go ahead and redo this next bit. But so here we go. So we've got our sun. Right now, we're just using raw degrees to rotate this, to rotate our sun object, right? What we're going to do though is what if we wanted to be like, hey, I know I'm making these mountains in Chicago. I'm not in Chicago right now, but we're pretending there's mountains in Chicago. And I know I want it to be at sunset in Chicago in February. What I need to do is I'd like to be able to have this sun cycle, right? And be able to be like accurate to the physical world. And so what I need to do is I need to use something called the sun expression tag. And I don't want to necessarily put that on the sun. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the sky object. And there's a couple ways I can get to that. First, I can right click on it. I can go to render tags, and it's the very last one, it's sun. If I type, I can also, once I've right clicked, I can type to search, and if I just type in sun, it'll just show the one tag that I need, which is a great way to do it. The other option is if I have my hierarchy selected and this object selected, I can hold down Shift and C, and it'll pop up the commander, and then I can just type sun in, and right, it's going to go through, and actually the very first option is the sun expression. Okay, so I currently have the sun expression attached to my sky object. And so if I go ahead and click on my sun expression, and let's pull this over so you can actually see what's going on, and we'll move this as well. You're going to note that, right, suddenly everything in my scene has changed. You're going to note that everything in my scene has changed, and that's because it is currently February 13th, 2024 at 12 p.m. It's about 15 minutes off. If I click now, it will actually update the time to be exactly the time that it is now. And then city is set to custom right now, which is, I can't remember if this is my latitude and longitude or if this is just a default latitude and longitude. If I was to click on here, I can either say new city, or I can just go through and get something close, right? If I'm in North America and go to USA, I'm in the Midwest. Granted, this is further north than I am, but it's about in a line with where I am. Chicago might work too, although obviously sunset's going to be a little earlier there. I'm a little further west. It really just doesn't really matter, but we can go ahead and say, let's just do Minneapolis. right? And so it's going to look a little different because the angle of the sun's going to be a touch different. But then I can either use the current time, the current day. I can go and change any time of day anywhere. And then I can also go ahead and just click and drag on the dial here, and I can actually go ahead and change the time of day. And so if I get a little bit further along here, let's go to, and right, it's in, military time. You can see the sun is starting to set now. It's 1626, right, or 4 whatever. If I go a little bit further to 1655, we're going to get closer to sunset. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate my view so we can actually see the sun again. Right, and so there's our sun in front of our mountains. And we all know that, what's it called, is a huge mountainous area. Minneapolis, big mountains everywhere. And so now I can step forward just a few minutes. And you can see, right, this is tracking as though, right, it's actually following the path that the sun should follow. I can go a little bit further. This is probably sunset. Look at that. Okay. That's all I needed to add to this, and I lost that little bit. But yeah, so if you want to be able to set this to some time and place in the world, and you can do any longitude and latitude you want, that's what we got.